Hey guys, it's Gunther here from Outdoor Photo, and today I would like to discuss with you or show you some of the samples of what I would do and how I would approach shooting long exposures and also the editing process itself. Hey guys, let's check it out. So on the side here, I'm just going to turn myself a little bit off to the side, but I would like to share with you exactly how I would go through these processes. Now, some of these images, the majority of them, or the ones that I'm going to be editing, I actually shot underexposed and using a variety of different items. There are three main shots that I want to do. The one's going to use an entire ND filter across the shot, stopping down that shutter speed to a very slow shutter speed, dragging it out. And then obviously we go across to some of the shutter speeds that we try and balance it out. And then finally we're going to do one with a graduated filter on it. The graduated filters specifically are there to darken your horizon. So if you're shooting sunsets or sunrises, obviously your horizon is going to be a lot brighter than your foreground. So let's start off with a complete ND filter across the entire image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open Photoshop here on the side. I'm going to drag that image down into here. We have Adobe Camera Raw coming up. Now obviously the first step, I used a very long exposure time here, shot this way back with a 5D Mark IV. That rock down there is as big as my house. But use the 24-70 70mm f/18 because ideally you do not want to stop down to the minimum of a lens. You will get diffraction of light coming in. It does impede the image quality, if I can put it that way. You're not going to be happy with the sharp image quality that you're actually looking for. So the Canon 5D Mark IV, I could stop down to 50 ISO. The 50 ISO doesn't sharpen the image from 100 down to 50. It literally just helps to block out some of the highlight. Continuing on this image specifically, we ended up on 13 seconds, as you can see at the top right hand corner here. The majority of the light is towards the left hand side. Obviously we've got a bunch of dark spots in here and somebody didn't clean their lens or their sensor, but that is an issue that I never take care of when out in the field. I'll always take care of that as soon as I get back. I know the spots there. Do not blow it out with your mouth. We clean spit spots here more often than you'd like to think, and it is slightly gross. Do not blow it out with your mouth. So lifting up the exposure slightly, but that's not the majority of it. We were specifically trying to cut down on the highlights and darken things down a little bit so that we've got a little bit more room to play here. So I can drag the highlights up slightly higher and the shadows as well. We can really lift the shadows. Whites I'll pick up slightly and blacks I'll drop down again, just to bring in that contrast. As soon as you split these, you're basically pushing that contrast. But it is a little bit more control that you're going to practice out on the blacks and whites versus just ramping up your contrast, which will have an effect on your image quality, your image colors and everything else. Vibrance, I very seldom play around with vibrance, and saturation is also, if you push it up too high, it looks, if you take it down to like you're sitting on a black and white. Touching on black and white, if I can digress for 2 seconds, pick one. It's one of the most difficult decisions that you can make as a photographer. Are you going black and white? Are you going color? Pick one, post it. Don't post both. It's not whoever's choice. It's your choice. You are the one that's creating this image. So choose it. Choose. I want to do this in black and white. I want to create some moody, dark effects, or bright or contrasty in terms of black and white or gray. But you make that choice. So I'm going to pull this saturation back and reset it. I am one of the suckers for a clarity slider. Now clarity sliders bring up contrast and sharpening in localized pixels. It literally like makes it pop, but if you take it too far, you're going to create halos around your subject, which is also not ideal. You don't really want to do that. So I'm just trying to find a sweet spot. I want the rocks to be sharp. I want them to look, kind of give you that wet effect, but I don't want to create it too harsh, because then we're going to lose all the detail or that soft effect that we're trying to create with the water flowing in. Dehaze also great if you're shooting in specific conditions. If it's very cloudy or misty, I usually bump up the dehaze as well. And then we're going to drop down here. There's a lot that you can do with the midtones, shadows, and highlights in your color grading. That is a video of its own. I'm not going to dive into that in this video. So we're going to go down, and I'm going to zoom in slightly here, grab my spacebar, and I can drag this around and have a look at it. Is there any significant noise that I see in the images? If there's no significant noise that I'm seeing, then bumping up this noise is actually just going to soften things out. And I don't necessarily want to do that. So I'm going to drop the luminance, noise reduction. Everything looks great in this image. I'm going to proceed with it as is. So let's open that. Once it's open, Control 0. Control 0 is going to take that full screen in your workspace. That I like working on big things. Working on tiny little images is an issue. Obviously, my whoopsie on my sensor, Control J. Control J, as I go through this editing process, I'll explain some of the shortcuts that I've set up. Control J is a standard shortcut in Photoshop. As soon as you hit Control J, it's going to create a new layer, a copy of the previous layer. So if you did something crazy to the layer, like layer blending or anything, if you do Control J on that, it's going to duplicate that. So you're going to have double that effect in the next layer. But this rock over here is also kind of like, it's half a rock, it's a tip of a rock, it's not a lot. So I tend to remove some of those items. If it's something that kind of bothers my eye, I'll just do that. A lot of people will obviously have different ways and means that they edit these images, and this isn't according to everybody's style. I'm simply sharing what I would do. So if something is similar to that, if I go Control Z, that doesn't add value to it. So I'll just remove it. It's gone. And then down here, there was this one stone. It's breaking this shadowy line that I've got over here. So I'll remove that out as well. So that's kind of the basic approach to it. I've got a clean image. I've got that contrast in terms of the black and whites. I've got the contrast thanks to the clarity that brings out that sharpness and localized contrast. And I'll do Control Shift E, Control Shift Alt E. That's a mouthful. I set that up as a shortcut in a action as F2. So in the future, if I want to merge all visible layers, that's slightly different to the Control J function. Merge all visible layers, and boom, we have that option up there. That's set up. And now I'm going to start tweaking some of these things. So I really want to make this pop. And there are specific areas in the image that I want to pop. So I'll create an adjustment layer, and I'll drag up the brightness on specific spots. But here comes the magic. You've got a mask on the right hand side down here, that little one. You have to make sure that that square is around the mask. If you put it over there, that square, then you're working on the adjustment layer itself. But I want to work on the mask. So as soon as I've got that mask highlighted, I hit B and it's on a brush. If I go to black, everywhere where I brush, it's actually going to erase that layer off of there. So I can paint it back in, I can take it out, I can do with it what I want. Control 0, and now I can start bringing more contrast into my images. So I can darken these areas, really to try and by splitting down or sizing down some of these areas, sizing down the brush, I can now focus on specific areas. I'm going to skip off of the mouse and use the stylus. This is just so much easier to maneuver around on these images and working on these things. So I'm going to go up here. I've got the brush, depending on how slight I've got that set up. I want that over there. That's looking good. That's black over there. And over here, I want to color that into that area, kind of creating different contrasty areas. So in terms of setting up the hardness of the brush, everything else, that's good. Black, I want that out. White in this area, go white brush over there. Just make sure that it's all colored in on this. So with that X, I can darken down some of these areas. Remember, in your images, the brighter areas will attract more attention in your image. So you really have to be selective to what you want standing out in the images. What has to be dark, what has to be bright, what effect do you want in these images? It's coloring there slightly tight. This area looks like rubbish. I'm going to start that over. So again, with the brush, see, that's harsh, and I don't like that harshness. So I can either try and color in over that and let it bleed across onto those areas. There we go, that looks like a line that I drew in there. So that's also not working for me. Let's drag that out. Alternative is going to your colors on your paintbrush and actually just selecting like a gray. So now we are midway instead of all the way. And that discoloration isn't as bad. I made a mistake there. That one's fine. I like that. That looks good. Let's just make our white again. Alright, so we've got that first layer in, and it looks like a little cloud at the top here. I'm just going to blend that in slightly. Get rid of that harsh point tip. Alright, now we go across to F2, creates a new layer, compresses everything together. So I'm going to put another brightness and contrast level on there, and I can push it up even a little bit more, but we're going to be very selective on which area. Now dropping the contrast will obviously bring out a lot of light, because you lose a lot when you push up the contrast. Your shadows are gone, everything else starts falling away. So we can play around with the contrast, we can play around with the brightness, we can drop the brightness. So if we really want to make it moody and dark, we can kind of do that. But what I would recommend, once again, looking at that mask overlay, that we brush out specific areas to brighten up. We want that a little brighter. Why is that not going bright? That is going bright, it's just not that bright. Alright, so we're going to highlight some of the areas in this image. We're specifically going to focus on these little patches over here. And that again just brings in that lighting difference. Now we're not 100% done here, and I want to show you another little trick that I use quite a lot in these images, because sometimes the effect is just too much. In terms of that, you can just go up to your opacity and you can drag that around. So you can say, hold on, how much intensity do I want on that? I'm pretty happy. It's 62, play around with it, see what you're happy with. Control Shift E, or if it's set up correctly, F2, and then we've got another layer. On that layer, I'm going to push up the brightness one last time. But on this mask, because that's selected, Control I is actually going to invert the mask. That puts you at a negative mask, so you have to color in the effect instead of coloring it out or erasing it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm specifically going to focus on focus points in the image. That rock is one of the major focus points. Now I have to be very careful not to create a halo around it. That halo that I'm talking about, if we have a look over there, if I zoom in there, so I went across with my brush over that whole point. If I go Control Y, I paint that effect back in, And I'm just going to soften that look around that edge. I'm pretty happy with that. So I've got a main focus point here, but it is slap bang in the middle. And now we can start having a look at different aspects here. So if I drop a C on there, it's going to give me a crop option. Now the wonderful thing about this, and that I've been discussing with a lot of the photographic groups that I'm involved with, is how your image can change as soon as you crop it and change the aspect ratio. At the top right here, or top center here, you've got a couple of different options in terms of your overlay to kind of give you an idea, what do you want to crop according to? The golden ratio, the rule of thirds, grids, diagonal lines, golden spiral. We can even go on this golden spiral with this one. That rock really is a major focus point, but not 100% sure that's not going to fit in. Looking at diagonal lines, we've obviously got the shoreline, coastline coming in, we've got these. So a lot of these rules kind of happen by accident. It's not accident. The more you go out and you go and play with your specific composition rules, they will come more naturally. When you start cropping, they will happen more naturally. It'll come easier to you. So setting it up like this, I think this is a much better look for this shot. And I would just save that to the side. So we're going to save it here in the new folder as a JPEG, and right at the end we're actually going to have a look at the different options and how we process these and how they came out. So I'm going to go back to Faststone. I use that as an image viewer. We're going to have a look at some of these images. Right now, the one image that I actually want to focus on here quickly is this image, the quick snap that I took. We've got a big stopper in on this image. It's a 6-stop ND filter to block out quite a significant amount of light. The waves were crashing in and out, in and out. I was shooting at f16 on a 16 to 35 millimeter lens at around 19 to 20 millimeters. The whole concept around it, again, I'm trying to block out as much light, but again, the sun just rising, camera left, and with that, I've got a lot of light coming into my horizon. So I dropped a neutral ND filter, but a gradient neutral ND filter, which roughly covers up this top section. You'll see it in the skyline here. I'll try and demonstrate it again, but this top area here, that actually has a 3-stop ND filter just over that section. It then fades out into a clear ND filter at the bottom. So it goes from dark to clear, specifically for this reason, so that we can take these shots and kind of line them up. But once again, I think I had too many smacks on the head as a child, and I'm always off by 3 degrees. So let's just try and fix that quickly. So I'm grabbing that little tool over there, the straighten tool, and I can now go in on my horizon, select it on that side, drag that line through to where it's supposed to be, and that seems a little bit better. Let's go. From there, some of the images that we're going to do here, again, I like myself a little bit of clarity on the rocks there. You're going to see how we're going to blend it in with the ocean in a second. The whites I'm going to bump up, the blacks I'm going to drop slightly. I'm going for a slightly more contrasty, moody look and feel. The highlights I'm actually going to drop on this one. Because I've got so much white in this image and I've bumped up the white slightly, I still need detail in the highlights. So by moving the slider, you'll see the highlights in the sky and in the ocean where the waves are crashing and creating that foam drops considerably. I prefer doing that and then pushing up the shadows in the darker areas. Looking up at the rest of it, vibrance, that sky was absolutely incredible that morning. Gonna bump that up slightly. Again, image quality, I'm pretty happy. There isn't noise in this image that I'm too worried about. So I'm going to leave the noise reduction. I'm going to open the image as is. Right, Going in slightly closer to this, obviously, what is the focus points around this? We've got these clouds up here, so we can bring in some extra contrast into that. We go up to the top here, brightness and contrast, we bump the contrast, and then on that mask, we can simply hit brush, make it as big as we can, hold shift, and brush across the foreground. What the shift does is it holds that line in a straight line, be it either vertical or horizontal. And that means looking at this overlay, I can now see where this mask is colored in and where it isn't. So I'm going to drop that size down. I'm going to switch to a white brush, hold shift, and start coloring in this skyline. I don't want to get too close to the horizon for a variety of reasons. If you get too close to the horizon, you're going to create that halo once again. So we take this overlay off, we can see the effect that's coming. I like that. I'm going to hit another brightness layer. I'm going to push up that brightness slightly. Now we got to get creative to what area we actually want that brightness to come into. So I'm going to do Control I, reverse the mask overlay, and now we're brushing in the effect that we want. So I want to put a little bit of extra light on these rocks and up into that area and up into the clouds. So it blends it in quite nicely because I'm using a very soft edge on the brush, but I don't want this area in the front here to pick up a lot of highlights. So I'm going to leave the brightness in that area specifically. I'm going to leave that alone. Then we're going to go across to bringing in more punchy light on this. Let's go Control E, Control Alt Shift E gives us a compressed layer again. So that layer is completely on its own. Anything I do on top of it is not going to affect anything further down below. The negative of that editing style of mine, if there is anything you want to change, you have to go and delete layers. So it's not necessarily the ideal system to use, but it is a bad habit that I picked up and I'm battling to get it shaken. So on this, I want to bump up the exposure slightly. That's not going to work. You see how the highlights just blow out completely. So I'd rather delete that layer and take a step back and go to the curves. With the curves, I can put it in the middle. The S curves is typically where everybody heads to, but that's not looking great. So let's rather pick that up, we drag that out, drag that one out, and we kind of put that over there. What we're going to do now is we're going to drag up that highlight. It gives me a glossy effect down in the bottom of the image. Not a glossy effect, kind of like a matte feeling of light coming in. Still not 100% happy with the light on this, so I actually want to bring in a mask, not a mask, but another curves layer. I'm gonna stop that out, give me a new layer, give me a proper mask. There we go. Drag that one up, drag that curve in. I like that. That really starts bringing out some of the contrast and the lighting in it. Control Alt Shift E or F2 depending on how you set it up, and then Control Shift A will give you your Adobe Raw camera layover. So again, contrast, not going to fiddle around with that. I'm going to try and bump up the shadows slightly in this area. Depending on what camera you're using, you will be able to bump up a lot of information out of the shadows on your RAW files, but some cameras just don't play ball in that sense. So here's looking at you, crop sensors. Crop sensors, incredible cameras, but their dynamic range just doesn't compare to what the full frames have to offer. What I've done now is I've bumped up the clarity on specific areas, but I'm going to put a mask overlay on this, and I'm actually going to brush that effect out over the ocean. So again, by hitting backslash, we can see where I'm brushing it out. The red is supposed to indicate the areas that are not affected by the mask. So if I do that, those rocks will have a little bit more contrast in it, and that's a whoopsie. It's just unwhoopsie that. There we go. That's typically how I would approach a shot like this. So looking at the discussion point on it, and again returning to some of the images and some of the tips that I've got and recommend to you. So here I've got some of the talking points in where and how you can use some of these long exposures. Going out to specific areas, I always try with the landscapes to try and get a person in the shot for scale. The editing process in all of this, again, this was big stoppers. So we put in a 10 stop ND filter in here to get this exposure as long as possible. We were up to about 5 seconds here, varying on some of the different settings. Here we used the 3-stop ND filter, so I was on 2 seconds, f18, 100 ISO. But the whole idea was get somebody in the shot to kind of just give scale to the story that you're trying to portray. This again, 2 second f18, so that clarity just kind of brings out the pop in the rocks, and we've got the long exposure dragging down the blur in the water and also across the water down the river. So with this image, I always try and mention I've got a big focal point with a big subject in my frame. I've got this diagonal leading line taking you up back to the waterfall where you most likely started looking and heading down here. But the stones surrounding this big focal point, I bring some brightness into that, specifically just to kind of create separation so that this doesn't just blend into the dark corner at the bottom here. And then obviously with the clouds, bring in some contrast, some clarity. Did use a slower shutter speed. Ideally, looking back at it, hindsight, I would have liked to have dragged that shutter speed out considerably to get the clouds flowing over in that area. Looking at more of those effects, depending on who you're photographing and your subjects in these kinds of images, I wanted to create an effect with the water flowing in the background off of the dam wall. Shooting a 70 to 200, zoomed in considerably, low angle of view, specifically to get Clint in focus and the rest out of focus. I've got a focus, defocused subject in the foreground. I've got my midground and subject in focus, and the background is out of focus. And that just simply 2 different angles and perspectives, giving me one shot or one subject photographed in 2 different ways. And that's why I always say, don't get stuck on one specific focal length. Talking about focal lengths, we headed down to Uvongo, and this is one of my personal favorite images. It's got a very special meaning to me because of the people in the images, but I won't digress into that long story. With this, we had a specific moment where we could go down to this pier and photograph this pier with a 70 to 200 millimeter, and I literally just tried to stop out as much light as possible. In doing so, we stopped down the light to f32 on a 70 to 200 because I was focused in on a specific subject. I had a 195 second exposure, and I simply put a very dark neutral density filter over this entire shot. I wanted to stop down everything as much as possible. So the people, when I'm zooming in here, you can see the pier is perfectly in focus, nothing has been shifted, but the people and everything else that's moved in the image has this ghostly effect or shift in it. So ended up with this effect. This is actually one of 2 shots in a series. There's another structure to the camera right, but in the final process of having those 2 images and this idea I had, this is the main character, and I felt like the other subject just distracts from this image. So I eventually killed the second image, and it hasn't really seen the light of day. But that is the Uvongo Pier. One crucial point when you are photographing out there and you're doing long exposures, remember to switch off your image stabilizer. It's a very crucial part. I have in my life never seen a colorful sunrise like this before or after this specific sunrise. Gotten close to it on the south coast, but that morning the sky was on fire. It was absolutely incredible. Took a 24 to 105 millimeter lens, neutral density filters over a tidal pool to get that mirror effect. There was some slight ripples in the tidal pool because of the winds, but because of the long exposure, no problem. If I bring up the settings here, this exposure was 30 seconds. So great image. I kicked down the front door when I got back to our holiday accommodation, woke the entire family up. I was so excited about this. Downloaded the images onto my PC and immediately saw this ghosting effect. This ghosting effect comes specifically from, if you have a look there, let me do this. If you have a look at that ghosting effect, or over here you can see it as well, that is part of your image stabilizer. It does use a lot of battery power out of the camera, so the default is that the camera would actually switch it off after a couple of seconds. In a long duration shot, like a long exposure, that element actually goes to rest or tries to fix the situation, and it's actually counterproductive. It creates problems. By switching the image stabilizer off, it actually locks everything into position, and then you've got this situation where, well, you would have not had this situation. This is one of my sad misses in photography. This is typically one of those, that fish that got away. This is it. Never had the sky like this ever in my life before. I look forward to a couple more summers in my life, and hopefully I can capture that. Guys, and then one last final favorite. This is the very first morning I ever went out to go and play with neutral density filters. And I say play because I firmly believe in the Gary Player method. The more I go out and practice, the luckier I get. And boy, was I lucky this morning. Took out a 6D with a 24 to 70 millimeter, took out 2 ND filters, recommended to me by a great friend and mentor in photography, Marcel van Aswegen. Went out to go and test out and play around, got everything set up, had my settings right, did a 1.6 second exposure with a 3-stop ND filter and another 3-stop gradient ND filter. This surfer walked past me. I greeted her, she walked past, and the first image, she was a blur in this section, and the second image, she stood there, got this shot, and that when that wave crashed, she was in the ocean and gone. Never saw her, never spoke to her again. Would love to get into contact with her and share this image with her, but this is one of my personal favorites. Very little editing, just some of the color and the vibrance that I dragged out, bringing in some contrast into that sky. But because I've got that 6 stops in total in the top, it's not as brightly exposed or overexposed, so I've got details there to work with. With the 3 stops in the foreground, I've got just enough shutter drag at a 1.6 second exposure where everything just kind of runs across. You've got that slight bit of movement giving you this soft effect and feeling in this image. Guys, share with us your tips and comments on how you guys edit your landscapes. Tell us if this is kind of more of the content you guys are interested in. Would you like to see some more tutorials on how I edit some of my images? Hit us in the comments below. What's your favorite filter? Have you played with this stuff before? Are you interested in this thing, in this kind of technique and shooting like this? Look forward to reading your comments and getting back to you as quick as possible in the feedback. Guys, thank you for watching this video. It's Gunther Swart from Outdoor Photo, checking out. I've got some stuff to go and photograph. Cheers.